مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. نحن في منتصف فصل الصيف، حين يبدأ الحر الشديد في واشنطن يمثل شبه جزيرة العربية، ويبدأ كثير من الناس في الإيمان بظاهرة الاغترار العالمي. غادر الرئيس والكونغرس ومعظم واشنطن البلد في طريقهم إلى الشاطئ، الجبال أو أي مكان. لم تختف مشكلات دولتنا، وإنما اختفى فقط الأشخاص المنتخبين لحلها. إذن هذه فرصة مثالية لنعود فنلقي نظرة على الضيوف الرائعين الذين شرفنا بصحبتهم في برنامج داخل واشنطن على مدار العام الفائت. ضموا جمهوريين وديمقراطيين، صحفيين وسفراء، مسؤولين حاليين وسابقين من مختلف الفروع التنفيذية والتشريعية للحكومة. وفيما يلي بعض من أهم ما جاء على ألسنتهم. I want to ask you about that new administration theme. It's been quite a while since an administration embarked on this sort of national mission to defeat an enemy, and has given a timeline first, and secondly, a timeline which carries it over to a next administration. Namely, between now and then, there will be a national choice about who the next president will be. A next president who may not endorse this enterprise. There are some prominent candidates who oppose this completely. What is the mindset here? Why even say this is a timeline that will take us beyond the lifespan of my administration?
Well, I would say, to be fair, there's also a degree of honesty here, which is he's established an objective that is a very hard objective to achieve. He says we're going to ultimately defeat and eradicate. Now that, by definition, is not something that can be achieved overnight. So I think here he's being honest. We cannot achieve that in the life of my administration. Second point is there have been administrations who have adopted positions that have a long time horizon in terms of what's required. Go back to NSC 68, which was the original concept for containment in the Truman administration. That was not a strategy that was going to be achieved in the life of one administration. So there is something legitimate about that. I do think it does also have another element to it, and that other element is that, you know, don't look at me as being the one who's going to achieve this objective. You know, the next administrations are going to have to carry this on, and we'll have to achieve that objective. And the question will be whether that's going to apply to other issues as well.
Dennis is right. You've seen this in the past in the George W. Bush administration as the handover was happening. Two things were occurring. One, you had the Afghan strategic review, right, and it had concluded before the end of the Bush administration, but the president made the decision he was not going to announce something new at sort of the closing months of his administration. He was going to hand that to President Obama and allow them to take the review on. That eventually then became the Afghan surge. That was really the baseline for it. The other thing was trying to provide continuity for the new team. Steve Hadley, the National Security Advisor for whom I worked, made very clear we were going to do everything possible to put the new team in a good position to succeed. And I think this sort of time horizon actually, for the first time in this administration's history, has them looking forward. So much of their foreign policy, in particular on thorny issues, has been looking backward, distinguishing from the past, trying to demonstrate they're not George W. Bush. Yeah. Now they really have to worry about the continuity for the next team. And I think that's actually healthy, because they then have to think about what are the institutions, authorities, policies we have to put in place to allow the next team to succeed for the country's sake. This isn't about politics, it's about succeeding for the country.
It will be interesting as to whether or not that will become a choice in the next election.
Are black people in America on the right track? Things moving in the right direction?
Well, it all depends. First of all, black folks have always had to have massive faith in the future because present day ain't been that great. 2009, President Barack Obama gets inaugurated. A study is done and the question is asked, are you optimistic about the future of America for your children? African Americans, Hispanic, Asians, all say with a majority yes. The only group that was not optimistic about the future of America for their children were whites. And I made it clear to folks then, I said, it's because we're moving towards a more majority-minority country, whites in America are realizing very quickly.
Can you explain what that means for our
viewers?
viewers?
What that means is there will be a majority of people in America who are black, Hispanic, and Asian than white. 30 years ago when we heard that, people said, oh, that's 80 years down the line. Well, because blacks and Hispanics were having kids at a higher rate than whites, that number literally went from 2060 to 2050 to 2047. Now some are projecting 2037. So all of a sudden, whites in America are going, whoa, we're not going to be running this thing any longer. And so that's one of the reasons why you see this level of friction. Why you see folks saying, oh, our country is changing. When you hear folks say we want our country back from President Barack Obama, that means something totally different to a black person than it does to somebody white. And so it's going to be a struggle because even now you're still dealing with the remnants of racism because we talk about better schools. Our school system in America is predicated on where you live. It's a neighborhood school system. Well, if I live in a poor neighborhood, I can guarantee I'm going to have a poor school. If I'm white and I live in a higher income neighborhood, I guarantee you that school is going to be better off when it comes to resources. And they don't want to share those resources with those poor schools. And so if you're black and you're constantly living generation to generation to generation in a poor neighborhood, then you have a problem. Between 2007 and present day, 53% of black wealth was wiped out because of the housing foreclosure crisis. And so after President Bill Clinton, you saw, according to the Pew study, you saw it sort of top out in 2006, black wealth, at its highest point in the last 30 to 40 years. Housing crisis comes in. Most Americans get their wealth from housing. Number absolutely drops down. And so at every juncture, since the Civil War, since Emancipation Proclamation, since Reconstruction, at every juncture when African Americans show a positive trend, something happens where feet are cut off and all of a sudden they drop back and you're essentially restarting over.
African Americans have had, for the last 7 years, certainly a symbol of success in the White House. Does it make a difference anymore if we have a black president in the future?
It makes a difference because the imagery does matter. But it has to matter because it comes down to the policies. I'm not interested if you paint a house black, but the foundation is screwed up. The house is still going to crumble. So that's irrelevant to me. What are the policies? In many ways, this administration has been scared to directly confront disparities dealing with race, trying to walk a very tight line. I've been very aggressive in challenging them on those points. And so the imagery matters because what it does is it forces Americans to have to confront the fact that, yes, this is the same day. This is no different than when Harry Belafonte was one of the first to have his own television show and Nat King Cole was on television. So you had to see that image every single day, and so you could not somehow ignore it. It matters when you have a black CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but still the question is, you can have a black Fortune 500 CEO, but will he or she change the makeup of their board, of their executive management, so you have a whole new generation of people coming in a generation later to actually replace them? That's the real question. And so what's going to happen now is, all right, President Obama will be there for a couple of more years. Frankly, he's sitting in a lame duck position. The real question, though, for African Americans will be, did we properly challenge President Barack Obama on our issues, and will we have the same credibility for the next president who's likely not going to be black? That's the real question, because if you're the next president, you might say, but you didn't ask the last guy for anything. And that was the mistake that African Americans made with President Barack Obama. We gave away our power out of fear of saying, well, we don't want to sit here and upset anything. I'll give you a perfect example. Our historically black colleges, they were being affected by this loan program called the Parent Plus loan that literally removed 14,500 students from their campuses, more than $150 million loss, and most historically black colleges, 90% of the budget is predicated on financial aid. I sat with them and they made a decision in August of 2012 not to publicly say anything because they told me, Michael Lomax of the United Negro College Fund, they did not want to affect the president's reelection. And I said, what the hell were you thinking? I said, you were there to fight for students and you chose not to say a word because of the election. I said, that was the dumbest thing in the world because you're supposed to ask for stuff during the election because they need votes. They said, well, we'll get it afterwards, and they never got it even after the election. That's what happens when you relinquish your power. And so the mistake a lot of African-American leadership has made is a fear of demanding something from the president, from this Congress, and an agenda because they didn't want to sit here and upset it. But the problem is your issues are still there.
I want to ask a more fundamental question, not least because we have Mort here with us. We've been just talking so far about deep structural problems in the two parties. Now, we've also talked in the past about reasonable solutions. A new book out, recent book by Tom Davis and Martin Frost, talking about reasonable solutions. What would it take? Well, first of all, what are some of these to remind our viewers? But what would it take to actually implement some of these ideas?
Leadership from somebody, right? Barack Obama is not a leader. Barack Obama is a talker. He thinks it's enough to make a speech about something, and I think he's even given up trying to persuade anybody who doesn't agree with him. I think he just is now decided that he's gonna manage by executive power. Whatever he can sign an executive order to do, he's going to do. I bet he barely even talks to a Republican ever, and he doesn't. Even Democrats on Capitol Hill say that they don't have good connections with him. We certainly don't have a leader in the House. Mitch McConnell is a leader in the Senate, but he's not a leader in the country. Nobody listens to Mitch McConnell. So somebody would have to rally the country around tax reform, around infrastructure development, around education reform, around the things that we need to make the economy grow.
So it's good to have at least some opportunity to have a disagreement with Mort, which rarely happens. I was kind of amused. Barack Obama is not a leader, he's a talker, but then he's doing all these things by executive action, which means he is leading, actually. Now, he's not leading by finding that common ground. But of course, the fact is, for the first 4 years of his administration, especially the first two, he reached out all the time. And what we had was a very conscious Republican strategy that fits our politics right now. No matter what you want to do, we're going to unite against you. So it's actually taken him longer than I thought it would to realize that he's not going to be able to do this through the legislative process. Now, I agree it would be nice to have leadership, but I also agree with John Boehner, who basically said, you can't be a leader unless you have followers. And if you don't have followers, you're just taking a walk in the park. And that's the reality of our politics right now. It's not so much a lack of leadership as it is a lack of followership. Now, I would say that what leaders have to do from time to time is fall on their swords to make something happen. And we may have an opportunity. That's John Boehner's leaving. Maybe he will lead now and bring up some of these reasonable solutions, which is to adjust spending so that we can actually accommodate the needs of the country without having deficits careen out of control. Deal with infrastructure, where we actually have had broad bipartisan agreement on a bill, but the Republican leaders in both houses won't bring it up because Republicans don't want to finance it. We have the frustration that there are actually solutions to a lot of these problems, but you don't get a reasonable opportunity to even debate or bring them up. Maybe that happens in the aftermath of these shocks on the Republican side, but I think we're going to have to go quite a ways before we move in that direction. I would say one other thing. You can find mechanisms around this a little bit to avoid complete explosions. We had it with the crisis over the debt ceiling a couple of years ago. Mitch McConnell devised a mechanism which enabled the president to raise the debt ceiling, Congress to voice its disapproval, but he could veto and then sustain a veto. We had the same thing to avoid a complete meltdown on the Iran deal, the same kind of mechanism that was used. There are some ways around the dysfunction in the process. It's sad that you have to move in that direction. We may do it a little bit more, but it's getting harder.
So those are devices to avoid disasters.
Yeah.
Obama can sign executive orders on certain things, on EPA regulations and stuff like that, and change the immigration law a little bit, but he can't solve the fundamental economic structural problems that need to be solved in this country by himself.
There was a time when universities were the source of great ideas for government and for public policy. That has waned in the last couple of decades, and the rise of research institutions, think tanks. Right. Do you see a comeback for universities? Do you see this gelling?
I think it needs to be. I think universities are under two kinds of pressure. So one is external, and if you're the president of a university, you have lots of constituencies, you have donors, and this notion of connecting to society, which by the way is everything from the local level, Durham, North Carolina, which has lots of social and educational issues, all the way up to the global. And I think there's a greater sense that universities and university presidents would do well to go back to the era in which they were big public intellectuals, University of Chicago, Harvard, and others. Terry Sanford, the president of Duke, was very much both in the political world but also seen as a public intellectual. Within universities, you have the demands of, you mentioned the book I wrote on Iraq before, back in the early 1990s, and when I published that book, my publisher said to me, "Is this a love letter to your colleagues or for the rest of us to read?" And it was the latter, and therefore they published it. There's too much love letter to colleagues going on in universities. And I think we as universities are incredibly important institutions. I think we have responsibility to connect to society. Think tanks like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy are fabulous, but I think that universities need to do that too.
How serious is the email legal situation that she faces?
It's serious. It's serious for her politically because this isn't a story that's going away anytime soon. Every week we're getting new revelations. The FBI is looking into the security of her emails and the security of her server while she was Secretary of State. The Department of Justice is looking into this. And so this is just not going away anytime soon. And I think you can see that her team is finally starting to recognize this because they've finally started trying to go out and explain to people how this happened, why this happened, but at the very beginning they weren't doing that. They were extremely dismissive.
It raises real questions of her judgment, of if you're President of the United States in the future, what kinds of judgment lapses are you going to have? You're Secretary of State and you're going to be dealing with highly sensitive issues, even if not classified issues. Why would you do this? You look at the company that they picked to handle this. It's this podunk company in the middle of Colorado that's got servers in its bathtub. I mean, it's a remarkable lapse in judgment, and I think that nothing criminal. I don't think there'll be a criminal case. I think Jeffrey Toobin and others have been writing about this, said this is all political. It's really not all political. It's one thing about her judgment and character and the kinds of choices that she and those around her made. And it shows a problem with the Clinton candidacy, is the Clinton candidacy comes in a highly defensive mode because of Whitewater, because of the way in which the vast right-wing conspiracy, as they defined it, were going. So they've organized themselves with moats and walls and defensiveness, and that robs that candidate from the ability to be authentic, real, new, and fresh. And that's one of the challenges they have.
President, quite interesting, he identified already the time frame for possible successes in the next administration, so which lowers the yardstick of his own success considerably and sets up some interesting dynamics for our presidential election. Play that out a little bit.
Well, it's kicking the can down the road a bit, but it is essentially making sure that in the next election, foreign policy is a big deal and it will have an impact. People will look at the price tag, they'll look at the efficacy or not of the things that President Obama has done. So I think that will happen. And it's just as Norm said, the GOP has got to come up with a coherent sounding strategy or set of strategies to compete, because I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton isn't going to come in with a worldview not inconsistent with things that she said in the past, and that's going to be the term. She'll fit rather well into what President Obama set up.
But by the same token, she can't, I mean, when you're middle of a war, she can't really blame President Obama for...
Well, she's already started to blame him.
But does this constrain her now that we've begun this conflict?
You know, in a way, she is in a better position, because as long as we have a popular action against a hated terrorist group that's beheaded Americans, it makes it harder for a challenge from the left to her. The biggest problem that she has in the Democratic Party is a dovish left wing that thinks that she is too hawkish on foreign policy. This could make it a little bit easier for her to fend off that kind of a challenge.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الأفكار التي سمعتموها لحل مشكلات واشنطن، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.